Hello there. It's the Airthings Masters quarterfinals. The match we are going to look at now is the one between Levon Aronian and Hikaru Nakamura. I don't think Nakamura needs any introduction. Probably the top online player now for a while. Him and Magnus Carlsen. Biggest Twitch chess channel by far. And a popular online chess personality. Also a top chess player, obviously. And then we have Levon Aronian, one of my favorite players, and when he's in top form, he's just fantastic. And I'll remind you, it's not a long time ago that he was, I believe at the time, the world number 2, and the clear favorite heading into the candidates, but then things sort of fell apart in that tournament. And he sort of hasn't regained that form again. But he's always among the top players. And on a good day, he can beat anybody. And we're going to start on day 1. And in this game, Levon Aronian has the white pieces. And well, as a lover of the London system, I was excited to see Levon play it here in this match. So he plays d4. You either love or you hate the London system. Right? Bishop f4, the London system. Now Hikaru goes for a principled approach. He plays bishop d6, immediately targeting the bishop on f4. And Aronian plays immediately bishop to b5, check. Unusual. I'm guessing in case of bishop d7, he would retreat the bishop and claim that the bishop is in the way of the knight coming to d7. Also in the way of the queen, protecting the bishop on d6. And if knight b to d7, black is not getting the setup that he wants. The setup with an early c5 and bishop d6 and queen c7 has been topical lately. So perhaps this is a way by Aronian to avoid that particular line. And indeed he has done so now after c3, castles. Of course black can take on f4, but this is sort of the way Rubinstein and some of the old masters are sort of associated this with Gelfand as well. He's a lover of Rubinstein, so that makes sense. White takes on these doubled pawns, but on the other hand he has great control over this e5 square. And white is quite happy to play this position, castle, and eventually get a knight into e5. And also claim the better bishop. This bishop is pretty sad. So Nakamura does not opt for that and castles. The knight comes out, queen e7. And very often in London, the battle revolves around black trying to play e5. If he gets the e5 break in, he's usually at least equal, maybe sometimes even slightly better. So white has to try to prevent black from going e5. So often early bishop b5 moves are played to do that. And also, now that there's no more a pin here, you have to find other ways. And knight e5 stops black from playing e5. So an interesting strategical battle. Knight e4 now by Nakamura. And Aronian takes. Now this queen c2 move, and this, he more or less forces black to play f5. He has to keep the pawn here. He could play knight f6, but then again, if you play knight f6, the knight is pretty secure on e5. But I think after f5, we see Aronian's idea. He now takes with a bishop on d7, giving up the bishop pair. But this completely secures a stronghold here on e5. The knight is well protected. And if you take on e5, my bishop will become strong. So first, Aronian plays h4, because otherwise Nakamura might have thought about g5, kicking the bishop back, maybe playing f4 at some stage. So h4, important move to secure the bishop. Bishop e5, preventing Aronian from castling. a4, and now we have a trade. Bishop takes e5, and bishop d3. So it looks like an even trade. I mean, we have a strong bishop here, and a seemingly strong bishop here. But I think one of them is much stronger, and this one is more like an illusion. It looks good, but there's nothing going on. The bishop on e5 is actually a monster. Queen b3, hitting the pawn on b7. Nakamura defense, and now f4. Cementing this bishop. And moreover, you can't really take this pawn en passant. Even though you undouble your pawns, what you're doing is you're opening the g-file. This doesn't really create any prospects for black. White will just play king f2, swing a rook over, maybe this one or maybe the other one, probably this one. Definitely this one because we need that one on the h pawn. And from there we're pressing on the g-file already. Big pressure. We can increase it with the h pawn and a very secure king here on f2. So white will be very happy. So this is out of the question. So the pawn structure is sort of defined after this f4 move. Now after this, Nakamura does not want to allow Aronian to play h5 and make more inroads into the black position, so he plays h5 himself. And figures there shouldn't be much trouble. I mean, white can get a rook on the g-file, but then what? Well, actually, maybe something. King f2 first. King h7 and rook h3. The rook is heading on a journey here. Don't stop believing. Rook g3. So he allows him to take the pawn on a4, but if you do that, you lost the pawn on e6. So white can actually do this. c5 and now rook g5. King h6. And it turns out that white sort of has a free hand. Black is not in time with any counterplay. And notice that this bishop is also controlling b8. So the counterplay on the b file is not going to arrive. So, like I said, the monster bishop, this one is indeed protected also, but it doesn't really do anything, does it? It doesn't attack anything, it doesn't really prevent anything white wants to do. So the contrast of the bishops is what's deciding this game. B takes c5, and now c4. Nice move. Not allowing black to play c4, when he has kind of more space and more square for his pieces on the queen side. c4 means that there's only the b file to worry about, but that takes a long time because we control this square. So I think this game is an absolute strategic masterpiece by Aronian. Queen c3 now, avoiding the trade. a5. Rook c8, trying to get some prospects for this rook. b3, just securing the pawn here on c4 before going on to other actions. And here the other actions arrive. Rook to h1. We want this rook on g3, doubling on the g file. Rook b7. Only one piece on the b file, so we don't have to worry about anything yet. Rook g8 and rook h2 and g3. Starting to resemble a little bit a game we looked at fairly recently in one of the pattern recognition videos, Kasparov against Bacro. Different circumstances, but Kasparov had rooks on the g file lined up like this against the pawn and the rook behind it. And the action in that pattern, the setup involved kind of the same thing that decides this game, which we'll see later. King h7, queen to c1, leaving the pawn, but you obviously can't take it because of queen to d1, attacking the rook. And notice once again this monster bishop controlling everything. No check on b2 because of this bishop. So the rook is hit, and if it retreats, what do? Rook takes h5. That's a good move, but stylistically you always go queen h5. Sacrifice the largest material you can. So the pawn can't be taken on b3. Queen e8, queen d1. And turns out black really doesn't have anything that he can do. And now rook takes g6. Crashing through. You can't take with the rook. If you do, queen takes h5. Can't interpose because of the hanging queen. If you move the king, then rook takes g6. It's going to be mate. So Nakamura had to give up his queen. And, well, the strategic masterclass continued. First, Aronian fixed his king. King g1, a6, and king h2, getting the king secure. We've seen patterns where the king safety is paramount in heavy piece endgames, and here we have the battle of the heavy pieces. So white having a safe king is important before trying to find inroads for the queen. And if white can do that, this should be winning. Queen d1, giving up this pawn, but the most important thing is to get the white queen into the black position. It's going to enter here or here. And once again, the bishop is the MVP, covering b2, so the rook is not coming there to put pressure on g2. Rook b1, and now the queen comes in. And nothing to be done, queen e7. And yeah, I think Nakamura played this move and then resigned, or his flag fell. But it's completely over. And the last moves would have been something like this. Queen f6, followed by queen f7. And bishop f6, the bishop landing on g5, when black has to give up the rook. And probably gets mated as well anyway. So, fantastic game by Levon. And this was enough to win the first day. So day 1 went to Aronian. He won this game and then 3 draws. So now we had to game 2. Excuse me, day 2. Game 1. Again, Aronian with white. And again, we have the London system. This time around, Aronian allows this c5 move. So the topical thing has been for white to play bishop g3, and for black to go queen c7, knight b to d7, and try to press immediately the break e5 through in the position. We mentioned in the first game that this battle around the e5 push is often what the strategic battle is about. And here, an early bishop b5 by Aronian again. One move later this time around. And now after knight c6, he takes on c6. Pawn takes c6. Trades on d6. And knight b3. Trying to set up kind of a dark square strategy. Very often in the London, you're playing for dark square domination. And trying to play against this bishop, hoping that this bishop will be kind of locked in by the wall of pawns on the light squares. Now Nakamura took on d4. We had some natural moves, knight d7, plugging away at these 2 squares. White wanted to jump into them, but Nakamura stops that. Queen d2, preparing to add some firepower to c5 and e5, either through c3, maybe e3, to add some protection to these squares. Castles, queen c3, f6. If black can get in e5, he's very happy. So the next moves kind of revolve around that. Bishop a6 first, rook takes e1, and rook f to e8. We have Aronian doubling here, rook e3, and rook d to e1. King f7 now by Nakamura. And now Aronian is able to play the move knight into c5. He centralized the rooks. All the pieces are in place, and now he starts with some active operations. This puts pressure immediately on the pawn, and you can't play e5 because white has too many attackers. He will take on d7 and then chop off on e5. We can't do that. So Nakamura takes. Aronian takes with the queen and takes. Now this would be absolutely fantastic for black if he could now play the move e6 to e5. He would have the big center. White can't really chip away at it, and the bishop will eventually come to life, and this will be better for black. But white has to move rook a3, hitting the bishop and then picking up the pawn. So black can't do this. Maybe it was worth a pawn sack. I doubt it, but that's another matter. But he defends the pawn, rook a8. Kind of a sad move to have to make. So perhaps black should have tried something else a bit earlier, but who knows? This is definitely a line that I will investigate for my own London interests, and maybe you should as well. But now knight d4, hitting this pawn and hitting this pawn. So looks like a bit of trouble here for Nakamura. How to defend the pawn? He plays e5. Intending after knight takes c6 maybe to put a rook behind it and win the pawn on c5. but knight f5 by Aronian, eyeing this square. Nakamura does not want to give up the exchange, but now f4. Now we're chipping away at the center. This is the difference. This is the way. Now we're going to be able to chip away at the center, and notice that e4 is strategical death. The knight on d4 will become a complete monster. You can't attack the c5 pawn with the rook because the knight covers it. Just like the bishop on e5 in the earlier game, this would be the absolute MVP. White can choose a flank to play on and where to put the pressure. Black can't allow this. So bishop c8 and now knight into d6. And since black can't allow this either to take and keep the knight on d6, Nakamura went for the exchange sack, took on d6. And now there's still pressure on the e5 pawn, so we have to do something about it. We have to keep it closed for the rooks. So e4, and Aronian tries to open it up, c4. King e6, but now, just in time, c5, securing the pawn. So protected past pawn, this will be difficult for Nakamura. Rook a3, bishop to b5, b4. It seems that it's just a matter of white finding a way to break through in position. But Nakamura keeps on fighting. King f5, active king, bishop c4, Aronian pushes, and plays g4. Trying to lure the king away, and I think his idea is correct. He now plays b5, breaking through, takes, and c6. And this is just absolutely fantastic. It looks like white is in time, black, after king e5. But Nakamura has, Aronian, has this move, c7. I'm so excited, I get confused who's playing who. Aronian with white, c7, boom. What's he gonna do? Well, don't you just pick up the pawn and attack it, control the square? Wrong. Rook takes a6. Beautiful. Check to the king, and we're gonna pick up the rook. Unless you take it, and then I make a new queen. Beautiful. So this idea pushes the pawns through. King e6, rook takes a6, GG. Fantastic stuff by Aronian. Two great London games, like black square strategy, model games. Love these games. Maybe a final note. I mean, black can move the rook, but we'll just play a5 and then put the rook on b8, completely game over. So yeah, this was day 2, the first game, and Aronian actually won the second game as well, but these two were definitely the key. The London games propelled him to victory. So we didn't have to play the last 2 games of day 2 because Aronian had already secured at least a draw on game 2, so he already won the match. So only 6 games in this match, fantastically well done by Aronian, and he moves into the semi-final. So both of the favorites around, Nakamura and Carlsen. Amazing stuff. But we'll keep watching. We have some amazing creative players left, Aronian and Dubov. I haven't yet looked at the other 2 matches. I might have a look at them. We'll see if I have the time, but at least for now, I'm calling it a day. And please leave a like if you liked the video, and see you in the future video. Bye bye.